Hi, everyone. I am Fleur Bradley. I'm the author of lots of mysteries for kids, including Daybreak on Raven Island and Midnight at the Barclay Hotel. So in Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, there are three kids who think they're going on a fun weekend getaway with adults in their lives, only to find when they get to the Barclay Hotel that Mr. Barclay, the hotel owner, has been murdered. And they're all stuck at the hotel for the weekend, and they have to solve the murder mystery. In Daybreak on Raven Island, three kids go on a field trip to Raven Island. They take the ferry to this island with an abandoned prison, very scary. And when it's time for the ferry to go back, they miss it. So they have to spend a night on Raven Island with this ghost hunting crew, this abandoned prison, a morgue, a lighthouse, lots of scary stuff on Raven Island. So that's that in a nutshell. I love writing books for kids, and I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about how I go from that very first idea to the printed book that you see in the store. So I hope you'll join me.
From idea to printed book, how do you go from that nugget of an idea to the printed book that we see in the store? I will walk you through that today. So here we have Midnight at the Barclay Hotel. That's a finished book and it looks fantastic, right? But it's a very long process to get to that point. So some of the most common questions I get are, how long does it take you to write a book? Where do your ideas come from? Do you do the illustrations? Who edits the book? I will show you how that works in practice. So every book starts with an idea, that nugget that you might have yourself when you're trying to come up with a story, which is really fun. It starts with the spark. So here's Daybreak on Raven Island, my latest mystery for kids. And that started really with the setting. There's this place called Alcatraz, if you're not familiar. It's a prison island off the Pacific coast. And I really found that place super inspiring. It's spooky, it's got lots of history. There's an abandoned prison on the island. You can even do tours. So I thought that was a great jumping off point. You can also start with the what if question. What if there were dragon eggs under the school, for instance? That's an idea that came up during one of my workshops a while back. So you can come up with anything, anytime you're looking around going, what if? Super fun. Sometimes it's a cool setting, like I said. Sometimes it's an interesting character, a tricky situation, or even a crime. With Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, I started off wanting to write a murder mystery. And when you're brainstorming, there are no wrong ideas. It's super fun. And that's what I try to remember when I'm working on a story. I try to be free flowing with my ideas. This is the fun part where a book is born. If you are writing a story, start at this point and just, let your imagination go wild and jot it down in a notebook. It's super fun. Then I work on a rough description. So this is the inside flap of the book Home for Goddesses and Dogs by Leslie Connor, a book I really liked. And in the library version, you can sometimes see the description on the inside. Very short. It is called a log line. So that's super short, kind of summing up the idea of the book. So that's what I start with when I work on a story. And then I write a plot description, kind of like what you see on the inside of the book. That helps me sort of figure out whether I like an idea enough, whether I like the characters enough, whether there's enough there for a novel, for instance, or maybe it's just a short story. That's fun too. But sometimes I can figure that out early in the process. And it makes me also figure out whether I like the idea enough. Sometimes I like a part of the idea, but I can't figure out quite how to make it work yet. And that's okay, then I set it aside. So this is a good part of the process to do that. And sometimes it takes me a little while to get it right. So Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, for instance, at first I wanted to write a murder mystery, but I didn't know where to set it yet. And in the very beginning, I looked at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which is right here in Colorado. Super fun, lots of different parts to it. And I'm like, oh, this will be fun. I'll do kind of a night at the museum. But it just didn't work for my murder mystery that I had in mind. So I set that setting aside in a way, put it back in my idea box. And then I went to the Stanley, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So first, we start with characters and conflict. So we want to have interesting people to go into our story, right? Because they're kind of what makes our story come to life. So I start with the main character and I try to think, okay, what do they look like? What do they love? What are their hobbies? What are they afraid of, maybe? Or what is it that they wish they were better at, for instance? Conflict is only interesting if you have two characters that don't really get along. So for Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, I have JJ who loves to go ghost hunting, and I have Penny who really doesn't believe in ghosts. So that's fun to kind of play them off of each other. Here I put Liar and Spy, which also has two very different characters, and that makes the whole story come to life, that sort of back and forth between those two. Opposing forces is what we call that. So basically, just kind of think about maybe a person in your class, for instance, that you don't quite get along with, who's very different than you. Well, that creates conflict. And when you put two people like that together, it makes the story interesting. Then I work on setting. It is really important in all my books. Settings is kind of like its own character. So this is the Stanley Hotel. It is here in Colorado in Estes Park. It's a historic hotel, and I went to visit it and did a ghost hunting tour because supposedly there's lots of hauntings in the place. I didn't see any ghosts, but I did get a perfect setting for my murder mystery, Midnight at the Barclay Hotel. And I took some of the stories that were already there and I made them my own. I created the Barclay Hotel. So if you're working on a story, you can brainstorm different settings and imagine how a story might feel different in each one. You can, like me, take a real life setting and create your own fictionalized version of it. Raven Island is also one. I decided to create my own island. It was more fun that way. Then once you have those ingredients together, the crime, kind of the conflict, the characters, the setting, then I start working on an outline. So outlines can be kind of intimidating if you are an aspiring writer, and you're looking at that outline for a book, for instance. There's a lot that needs to happen, right? But you can also use it as a fun brainstorming tool. It's like a roadmap for my story. So I try to think of obstacles that my characters might have to overcome to solve whatever mystery I've decided they need to solve. A very simple outline has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning is where we introduce our characters. The middle is where they solve the conflict, or they try to solve the conflict, and the end is where they actually solve the conflict. If you are writing a story, try to avoid cliches. So one of the things I do when I'm brainstorming, my first idea is sometimes one that I've already seen in a movie or a book, or it's sort of a cliche, something that's been done before. I try to kind of brainstorm until I get my third idea or something that might be just a little bit different. And you can do the same. Then it's time to write the rough draft. I try to write at least a few hours every morning. Sometimes I get up at 5 o'clock just to write because it's nice and quiet in the house. Nothing is happening yet, and I have all the time in the world, just me and the book. That's about 1,000 words a day if I'm working on a rough draft. And so it takes me about 2 months to write a rough draft. And if you are an aspiring writer, try to turn off the internet or your phone or any other distractions and try to find a quiet spot to write in your house, maybe. Listen to some music with your headphones. Habit makes it easier. So you see me every day getting up and writing or editing my stories. That's because it's a habit for me. So every morning I get up and I'm ready to go. It helps. It helps your brain also get started. So don't worry about making it perfect in the beginning. That's what I love most about being a writer, is that I can be really messy and I can craft and shape my story when I edit. So that's when the real magic happens. So then it's time to edit, right? This is a picture of my actual notebook that I use. It's just a basic notebook that you buy at the store for $1. That's all you need, and a pen. So I tried to kind of come up with, okay, what big changes do I need to make? So I take about a month to edit my rough draft. And so those big changes are plot changes. You can see me here making, splitting up the sections and going, okay, what's not working here? What should happen here? Did this go a little too easy? Was this scene a little too long? stuff like that. Then I make smaller changes. I add nice language, description, anything that needs to be fleshed out. So that really means that sometimes when I first write my first draft, it's kind of a little short. So then in my imagination, it makes sense, but not on the paper. So I have to go and edit and make sure that for the reader, it's also making sense what's happening. Then I give the manuscript one more read, and then it is off to my editor. So my editor sends an editorial letter. She'll tell me what worked, what didn't, and what bigger changes she'd like to see. That letter is sometimes 5-10 pages long, depending on how much needs to be done. And in the beginning, I'm like, oh, that's a lot of work. But then the story gets better for it. So I start with those big changes. Then I take about a month, and then we do this again, although at that point, it's usually the smaller changes, character depth, stuff that maybe doesn't make sense in the story and it made sense in my head. She'll say, hey, this makes no sense. You need to fix it. So I will do that. And from that very first idea to the finished manuscript is about 6 months. There's some breaks in between, usually in those 6 months. So overall, it takes about a year from the beginning of that book to the very end when we're all done. And then it goes off to the copy editors. I get to take a breath. I make cookies because I like to celebrate when I have made a big accomplishment, and that's a big accomplishment to finish a book like that. So I make cookies or I get cake. So that's about a year. And then there's a whole nother year before the book is published and available to buy, because there's a whole bunch of people that make the book look good, like copy editors. They read the book for details. An illustrator is hired for the cover. I do not get to pick the illustrator. I don't make the illustrations because I'm not a good illustrator. They hire someone who's a professional for that. And the art department puts the book together. So those are people who are good with computers, for instance, and with graphic design. So they designed the book so it looks good. So when you take a look at some of my books, you can kind of see all the parts that are that go into making a book. So that's like a year or sometimes more later. So really, from the time the book is acquired, so that means that a publishing house says, yes, I love this book, until it's in the store, it's about 2 years altogether, a really long time. But my part, basically 3 months to write, 3 months to edit, and then there's waiting in between when I work on other stuff. So right now I'm already working on my next book. So some tips if you are an aspiring writer. Have fun because writing is the best. I love being a writer. I can do whatever I want on the page and I can let my imagination soar. And then when I go talk to readers, I can see, yes, they love the story too. If you have some critique partners or writer friends, that's always great because then you can send each other your work, you can encourage each other, because writing is kind of a solitary endeavor, as you can tell from my time here. I spend a lot of time alone, so it's nice to have some writer friends. That's a picture of my writer friends. Keep learning and keep reading. That's my favorite part too about being a writer. I spend a lot of time reading and learning I read books and I look at how other authors, for instance, do certain things, like how did they develop a character? And you can do the same thing. If you have a favorite book that you really, really like, you can kind of read it and sort of dissect it like you're a scientist and look for, okay, why do I like this book? Why do I like this character? Keep writing. It's super fun. And then tell me how your story goes. Here are my books. This is Daybreak on Raven Island. It's about 3 kids who go to Raven Island on a field trip, get left behind when the ferry leaves, and they have to spend the night there with a bunch of ghosts and prison stories and lots of haunted stuff. Here's Super Puzzle-tastic Mysteries. It's a collection of short stories by lots of different writers. I have a story in there, as well as lots of famous people like Stuart Gibbs from Spy School and Chris Grabenstein, who edited this collection. It's really fun. Mysteries that have the solution in the back, so you can kind of learn from how the clues are in there and how that's done. So here's Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, my mystery for kids. And the Double Vision trilogy, which is kind of like Spy Kids, 3 books that are about this kid who has to take the place of a spy kid who is stationed in Paris, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles in each of the books. And he has no idea what he's doing, so it's kind of like Diary of a Wimpy Kid meets Spy Kids. So those are my books. Thank you for joining me today for this slideshow, and I hope you let me know how your mystery goes.